Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Guardians of Liberty podcast. I'm your host, Nathan Parada, joined as always, my co-host, Zach Taylor. How you doing, Zach?
Pass.
All right, and we are joined today by Chris Powell, governor candidate for the Libertarian Party in Oklahoma. How you doing, Chris? Nice to see you on.
Very good. Thank you for having me on, fellas. I appreciate it.
All right, so you're the former chair of the Libertarian Party of Oklahoma, and you've ran for office on 3 separate occasions. Your last run for county clerk was quite successful, actually. You garnered around 36% in your district. Tell us a little bit about your history with the Libertarian Party of Oklahoma and about your runs for office previously.
Well, I ran I joined the Libertarian Party in 2000. I had come to the conclusion that neither of the two establishment parties were ever going to be anything that I wanted to be involved in. And then I found Harry Brown and that campaign and got very active from there. The next year I became vice chair of the state party, and then 2 years after that I started a term as chair. In 2000 I ran for state legislature and got into double digits as far as my percentage there. In 2002 I ran for Bethany City Council. Bethany's the city I live in, as part of the Oklahoma City metro area. I got 34% in that race. I was one of 4 insurgents against the power structure in the city at that time, but I was the only libertarian of the 4, and we all lost. But of the 4 of us, the other 3 that were Republicans, I got a higher percentage than any of those 3, and I was pretty happy about that, even though if it wasn't for a last minute bit of mudslinging from the power structure, I think I might have won that race. And then 2016, as you mentioned, I ran for Oklahoma County Clerk. Oklahoma County is where Oklahoma City is the most populous county in the state. I got 89,000 votes. Compare that to Gary Johnson's total statewide, which was not quite 84,000. So I beat Gary in one county compared to his statewide total.
That's an awesome number right there. Usually when you hear about libertarians running for office, like typically don't do well, but you came, most libertarians do, to actually winning your seat. So what do you achieve? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, if the guy that I was running against, if he had done me the kindness of getting another DUI in October, I would be the county clerk right now. So I was certainly very pleased with the outcome. It was, as much as I had hoped it could be going into it, but with a little bit of luck, it could have been even better.
So what do you attribute your high percentage numbers to?
Well, part of it is picking your spots. I made sure that I got a 2-way race in that. I would have actually preferred to run for the court clerk position. That incumbent had some other issues as well, but he drew a Democratic opponent, and so this other race did not have one. So I made sure I got that 2-way race. And part of that is that when you can do that, it forces people who would otherwise never consider voting for a libertarian to give it some thought. A lot of the votes that I got are from people who, if there had been a Democrat on the ballot, they'd have voted for the Democrat. But because there wasn't, and I was there, they had to actually think about it and say, oh, well, here's this libertarian I could vote for. And if you can get them to vote for a libertarian once, you can get them to do it again.
Now, were those all partisan races?
Yes.
Oh, okay. That's very different.
The city council race in 2002 was nonpartisan, but the rest of them were.
Okay. Yeah, that's very different from the way it is in Nebraska. So I remember Rex Lawhorn was on here a couple weeks ago, and we talked a little bit about this, how Oklahoma has a lot of partisan races. Whereas Nebraska, we tend to keep most of our races nonpartisan. I mean, even our legislature is officially nonpartisan. And that makes it easier for libertarians to get more votes because people like to, vote along party lines instinctually. And if they don't have the party name on the ballot, it's harder to do it that way. But it's really good. It's a really good sign that you're able to get those kind of vote totals with an L next to your name, and up against, Republicans or Democrats or whatever the case may be. So is that something you encourage candidates in your state to do, to run where in non-contested races so that they're one of two candidates as opposed to going up against multiple ones?
Yeah, it's something that when there's somebody who is interested in being a candidate, I certainly I encourage them to look at all the races up and down the ballot. For our general election, we've got the statewide races, we've got federal, we've got the state legislature, we've got those county races, and they're all on the ballot at the same time. So you got a lot to pick from. If somebody who really wants to do that, wants to build the brand that way, they have those opportunities here.
So what inspired you to run for governor this year?
Well, with the environment, with the dissatisfaction with the two establishment parties nationally and locally, you probably heard about our teacher strike and all that stuff. And there's a lot of other reasons to be dissatisfied with both establishment parties here. I think it's very fertile ground for us to make a lot of progress, work on building the party to going forward. My goal is, at the end of this, is to have the Oklahoma Libertarian Party be in a position where we are a permanent fixture, and they can't get us off the ballot, where we've got too many people for them to move us. So that's what I'm trying to do. And having this contested primary, Rex and the other guy and I have all done forums on the same, basically being treated exactly the same as the establishment party candidates. We've appeared at several events with many of them, and it's generated, it's a story. There's a drama there. We haven't been on the ballot before for a gubernatorial election, and so there's that part of the story, and there's this actual contested primary. We've had primaries before that we've manufactured as part of our electoral strategy, but this is really legitimately, we're all trying to beat each other. And those two things combined have done wonders for us as far as getting us attention from the media. And when we get into the general election, we're going to continue to have that credibility because we've been in front of those TV reporters, those print media reporters, and all of that. So it's setting up to be a tremendous opportunity that we just can't afford to waste.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, it's always good for publicity's sake to have an actual primary, not a paper primary where people are just on there for the sake of being on there, but to actually have qualified candidates who are actively seeking the job and are willing to compete for it. So you're in a three-way race for the nomination for the Libertarian Party for governor. We had Rex Lawhorn on here a couple weeks ago. You have one other opponent. Why, out of those three, why are you the best option for the nomination?
Well, I've been with the party the longest. I've got the most experience as a candidate, and I've been involved in state politics for a long time. I've assisted with various pro-libertarian Republican candidates in some of those campaigns, built some bridges there. I've actually, there was a fellow who ran as a Democrat in a special election late last year that was a co-worker of mine, and I was involved in his campaign. So I've not only run myself, but I've been involved in these other campaigns and these other efforts on issue campaigns. So I think that does a lot to allow me to use that experience and that knowledge gained from those to really put forward an effort in the fall that is going to build the party and give us the opportunity to maximize our votes in November.
Awesome. So I asked this question to Rex when he was on. I'm going to ask the same to you. What would you say are the three most important issues for this upcoming election? Education,
and I have been talking about devolving authority and responsibility away from the state legislature and also from Washington, D.C., but in the context of this race, talking more about the state legislature, back down to our local school boards and talking about increasing the percentage of funding that is not controlled by the legislature, because they mandate testing, they mandate curriculum, they give all these rules and regulations and reporting requirements to teachers, and they've made all of our teachers extremely unhappy. But the narrative has been has become about funding rather than control, and everything that has been done by the OEA, that's the teachers union, has further put more and more control in the legislature's hand rather than putting it back down to the school boards and the local authorities and those teachers and parents that are actually there and actually go in those local schools. I would also talk about criminal justice reform. Our incarceration rate is ridiculous. We are second in the nation, and of course, as a nation, we incarcerate more people in the world. So that's it's too expensive. We just can't keep doing it, for one thing. And of course, there's the moral issue of we're putting people in prison. We have a lot of people who are in prison for drug possession, things that they have done. Whether you agree with whether they should do it or not, they've done it to themselves. They haven't harmed anybody else. Why are they in prison? So we need to address that, reduce our prison population. And we also need to prioritize our state spending. There's all of these calls for tax increases. We've actually had a tax increase pass earlier in the session, but we have not, even though we've had budget deficits for several years now, we haven't prioritized our spending and gotten rid of any of the crony capitalism or any of that stuff. We have an incentive evaluation commission that was created a couple of years ago, and basically it's a rubber stamp commission. There's $450 million in programs, not counting the ones that don't have a specific dollar amount attached, and none of it's getting cut. They're not talking about getting rid of any of that at all. I would think if we can't fund our schools, if we can't pay our prison guards enough to where we don't have the specter of a prison riot hanging over our heads every day, then maybe we can cut some of these incentives and fund those things better. But the legislature hasn't done it. So those are really the three top things I've been trying to talk about.
All right, so let's get back to the education issue. I mean, this has been something that's been in the news recently coming out of Oklahoma. And you talked about how the teachers union is focusing more on increasing funding for schools as opposed to looking into accountability for the funding that already exists. Do you think that the reason for that is, I don't know, kind of self-indulging on the part of the unions because more funding is obviously better for them personally, or do you think that they simply are not aware of the solution that you present and why it might be a better one?
Well, every time I talk to a teacher one-on-one and talk about putting authority and responsibility close enough to where they can have some effect on it, I get a positive response. But the OEA and the American Federation of Teachers, they don't want to hear that. It's easier for them to do the one-stop shop and go down to the legislature and beat those guys over the head and then give some of them some campaign donations and try to get what they want that way, because these are the union officials. They're not the teachers actually in the classroom. So we've got to talk past those folks and get to the teachers themselves and say, hey, you are the education professionals. You're the people who are have the training to run a classroom and be creative and be innovative. And it's the legislature that's preventing it, and it's the unions, the union leadership that is putting more and more control in the hands of the legislature. So that's really the approach I've been taking, is trying to communicate with teachers and not around the union, because going through those organizations is not going to get us anywhere.
So I don't know how Oklahoma does it. So how much of your education budget goes to the state colleges in Oklahoma? Do you know?
I don't know that number off the top of my head. I know.
Is it part of the budget at least?
Yes, we do put a lot of money into higher ed. I just don't have that exact percentage in front of me. It's like 53% is common ed, K through 12, and then there's a significant amount that goes to higher ed as well. And we have, one of the criticisms that I would have is that we have our smaller colleges, and we do have a lot of them. I don't know that we have, we might have more than we need. But the one thing I will say for the smaller colleges is that they are a lot more tied into the market. They are training people for job skills that are needed. They're responsive to industries that are saying, we need people who know how to do this. Our flagship universities are turning out people that are going off to other states to do things and getting degrees that are not tied into our local economy. Mm-hmm. And that's
a problem we have too.
Yeah, those institutions get the lion's share of that higher education budget. I would like to focus on the smaller colleges and not respond as much to the cries for more funding of these flagship universities that never stop building on their campuses.
Yep. So probably comparable, I'm going to assume comparable situations with Nebraska and Oklahoma as far as the way, football specifically is king at the schools. And I assume that Oklahoma is also one of those schools that actually does generate money with their football program as opposed to lose money.
Yeah. Glad to see you guys are on an upcoming schedule. That'll be fun.
Yeah, that needs to not, like, we need to not have caps like that.
Yeah,
but so do you think that there's a way to get taxpayer dollars away from funding stadiums, funding, like, for us, for example, our English department up here is basically teaching far left-wing, like, cultural Marxism in the English department, and it's caused a huge uproar amongst Republicans and Libertarians in the state. Is that a problem in Oklahoma, and how do you address something like that when these schools are pretty well entrenched in the minds of the voters?
I don't know that we have as much of an issue as apparently you're having up there. We do have at least one faculty member at the University of Oklahoma who's gotten in trouble for his very conservative views. But that's not to say that we don't have at least some of the type of issue that you're talking about. But a lot of that, if that really raises its head as an issue, to really change that, it's going to take more than the governor, and it would take more than the state legislature. Really, it would take the donors and the parents that are sending their kids to those institutions to do something about that. And I think that may be why we really haven't seen as much of that issue raise its head, because we are still in Oklahoma, and we're in many ways the buckle of the Bible Belt. And there's only so far that parents, there's a lot of parents in this state that send their kids to those schools that have some influence and would raise a ruckus if it really got way out of hand. So I think that's probably why we really haven't had that particular issue here. It's certainly not like down in Austin with that university down there, where they have the slogan "Keep Austin Weird." We have people around here that wear T-shirts that say "Keep Norman Normal." So it's a different culture.
So what you're saying is that you don't have a lot of students going around down there with sex toys out in public like they're having in Austin?
I don't think that, not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
I'm not on campus a whole lot, but I've not seen that or heard that.
Okay.
See, I would have thought the same exact thing about Nebraska, but we got our loonies at UNL.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, they do exist.
Well,
So
you guys are up there by Iowa and Minnesota, and that's there's some strange goings on up there sometimes.
So I'm looking at your website, and you're talking about having the second highest incarceration rate in the country. How does that happen?
Well, we've had a lock 'em up mentality for a long time. Oklahoma is a interesting place. We were like the last of the frontier. We were the last place, one of the last places you could go with the Indian Territory, and we wound up with a lot of people who were run off from everywhere else and wound up here. And now we have the descendants of those people, and we're a little bit rough-hewn, and rough-hewn people tend to be more focused on punishment and retribution than the more genteel people from the coast and more longer established in areas of the country. So we're still historically we're still a very young state. So I think that has a lot to do with it. And the politicians that we've chosen to elect have been very interested in punishment and retribution. We had, back in the 90s, we had the push for truth in sentencing. And they put I couldn't tell you which ones they were, but they had 7 crimes for which they first enacted that truth in sentencing. And you had to serve at least 85% of your sentence before you could be considered for parole. Well, now that list is at 36. So you wind up with a lot of people in prison. We have vigorously prosecuted the drug war. You wind up with a lot of people in prison. And we're at a point where it is difficult for us to keep people in prison who are truly a danger to society. And, I think it's becoming clearer and clearer to even the more conservative, the more harsh-minded people in our state that we're winding up letting out really dangerous people because we want to put in people who haven't harmed anybody but themselves. So I think we're coming around on it, but it's a little bit of a cultural shift in our state to try to get that across.
All right, so this is a problem that we also deal with in Nebraska. We have a lot of prisons that are way too overcrowded, and they've resulted in several prison riots in which staff and prisoners have both gotten hurt. Is that a problem in Oklahoma as well? I would imagine having that many prisoners would lead to overcrowding, which would lead to prison riots as well. Is that the case?
We have a serious overcrowding problem, and thankfully we have not had any major incidents, but it's a ticking time bomb. It's only a matter of time before we start having those and having them on a regular basis. We have very low paid prison guards, and we can't retain them because we don't pay them well, and they have terrible jobs where they're understaffed and have a lot of responsibilities. So I think part of it is, we may be a little, Oklahoma Okies may be a little bit harsh-minded as far as retribution and punishment goes, but as far as trying to get along with the guy in front of you, we're a lot better about that and trying to fix problems in our interpersonal relations. We didn't get what was called what's known as the Oklahoma Standard for nothing. There was our response to the bombing. There's our response to the tornadoes that we've had in our metro area. People here really, when it comes to a pinch, sometimes we are really, really good at pulling together. And I think that may be part of what's going on in our prisons with why we haven't had issues like that, because everybody knows they're in a leaky boat and they're trying to not make waves. So, I just looking at it from how you would look at it on paper, it really is surprising to me that we haven't had a major incident yet. I wouldn't be surprised to see it tomorrow, the next day. But I think there's a reason why it hasn't been as bad as it has been. And unfortunately, it may take something like that to really wake up some of the people here that have roadblocked criminal justice reform.
Right. So say you win the primary, you win the general election, you are now governor. What's the first thing you do to fix this problem?
The first thing I would do is look at seeing what we can do to streamline some of the processes to get some of these, to reduce that incarceration rate and get some of the people that are behind bars now that shouldn't be out. Our director of corrections department, Joe Albaugh, is saying, he says that there's probably 60 or 65% of people in our prisons that shouldn't be there. They should be with their families, in their communities, in programs to where they're trying to be, where they can be helped to become productive citizens. And when the director of the Department of Corrections is saying that, obviously there's a problem there that needs to be addressed. I've been told anecdotally that our current governor recently rated the second worst governor in the nation. Our current governor has had approved parole and pardon requests on her desk, and they've just been ignored, which is mind-boggling to me. She presents herself as a champion of criminal justice reform, but everybody in this state knows that Mary Fallon says things and then there's nothing to back it up. So that would be an immediate area of concern, is to look at that incarceration rate and seeing who we can get out.
Awesome. I mean, a lot of the reasons that I find that you get high incarceration rates, one, because of the drug war. The drug war seems to inevitably lead to high incarceration rates. And two, a lot of states just have really stupid laws that can get you in jail that really shouldn't. That a fine or house arrest or whatever would be perfectly sufficient, but the state decides, hey, you got to go to jail, and that's just the way it is. Can you think of any laws in Oklahoma that fit the bill that you'd like to see repealed?
Well, we had something that we passed in 2016 to decriminalize marijuana and other narcotics, and it also decriminalized some property crimes. And it was good. It passed by an overwhelming margin, but we've had some issues with implementation. Our district attorneys, they went from charging people with possession to charging people with distribution so they can get them on a felony. So we've had a lot of that, and we need to address that. So we haven't really reduced the rate of people going into the system that shouldn't be going into the system. So that's something to address. We also have, we did something that was kind of silly on our property crimes too. We raised the dollar amount for a lot of our, shoplifting, things of that nature, from $500 to $1,000, which is fine. I mean, Texas actually has a limit of, I think it's like $2,500. But the thing that Texas does that we don't is they made it cumulative. So if you commit a property crime, if you steal $980, it doesn't matter how many times you do it. You can keep doing that, and it never becomes a felony. So that encourages our district attorneys to overcharge on, whatever they can to get somebody that they know is a career criminal. And then they get in the habit of doing that, and they overcharge on everything, and they overcharge on everybody, just like they do with narcotics. So we need to look at how these things actually play out and how they work. And we also need to do a lot more work in getting our district attorneys on board with the idea of not trying to throw every single person that they can into prison. And that's also a conversation we need to have with voters, because what do we elect a district attorney on? They all run on their record of putting people behind bars. And we need to tell the voters, hey, if you keep doing that, it's going to cost you, not just in the lives that are, both in the lives that are destroyed by that. You put somebody in prison that doesn't need to be there, and that's the higher education system of the criminal world, and they come back out and they're a lot more dangerous than they were when they went in. And it costs too much in tax money. We can't fund our other core services because we're spending too much incarcerating all these people. So we need to impress upon the people, on the voters of this state, that they need to think about that when they vote for district attorney, just as when they vote for everything else.
So my background is I went to school for criminal justice. Mm-hmm. What we've found mostly is in doing polling and exit polls and all that is that people don't like to think about these issues. They just want that emotional high that you get with saying, I'm tough on crime. Mm-hmm. I want bad guys to be locked up. How do we break out of that? Because that's that mentality that this is easy. I don't have to think about it. How do you combat that? Because that seems to be our biggest struggle.
Well, I think it takes talking about district attorneys when you're running for governor or running for state legislature. The offices that make the policies that are designed to fix our criminal justice problem, if the people running for those offices don't talk about the offices that carry out the policies, like district attorney, then the voters aren't going to think about it. You've got to put it before them and help voters understand how this works and how that vote for the tough district attorney backfires on them and costs them both in tax dollars and in lives, or they're never gonna see that. You got to do the math in front of them so that they know what's going on. Politicians are supposed to be communicators. But most of them in the two establishment parties spend all their time just trying to get back in office so they can do whatever they want and live that life of being the elected official. One of the things that I think is really incumbent upon all libertarian candidates is to try to be communicators, and the better we get at it, the more people respond. That's been my experience.
How do you get Republican, Democrat, independent voters in Oklahoma to vote for a libertarian candidate?
I think it's just the same as with any other campaign. I mean, politics is and elections are a thing that you either do well or you do poorly. Establishment party candidates can get by with doing it poorly a lot of times because they have financial resources and they have that team mentality backing them to where they get a bunch of votes for free. But everybody, and the really bad part about that is that anytime anybody gets elected, they automatically assume it's just because the voters love them so much, and that's not so. They may hate the other guy more is the only difference. We've got to do a better job of organizing campaigns and getting out and getting ourselves in front of voters in retail politics settings, so that we can communicate and show, that and we do have some who are spiky haired and have lots of piercings and all that kind of stuff, and alternative lifestyles. But that's not everybody. That's and even so, when that person's in front of you and you're communicating with them, and you begin to see that person as a person who really wants a better world, that's really what we need to do is get in front of, get face to face with individual voters and communicate our message and make it clear, even if you disagree, we're trying to do the right thing. We're trying to make a better world. We are not here to try to, we're not all secret agents of the Koch brothers trying to create a corporate oligarchy. We're real people who are trying to come up with real solutions for the very problems that our voters are facing and want to deal with.
I mean, I don't know about you, but I love to be getting some Koch brother money for what we're doing. All right, so you talked about financing and taxes and accountability for that being the third most important issue in the race this year. So expand on that a little bit. Why is that one of your top three issues?
Well, we've had a cabal of Republicans in the state legislature that have tried to stand in the way of any and all tax increases. And I certainly have a great appreciation for that. In fact, a couple of those people are friends of mine. One of them is a guy. One of the main people is a guy that I have known for a very long time and really admire his penchant for consistent no votes. He's sort of like if he were in the medical field, he would be the Dr. No of Oklahoma, like Ron Paul was in Congress. But they really have not offered specific suggestions to cut spending where it needs to be cut. We haven't really talked about getting rid of some of those things before the Incentive Evaluation Commission, which, like I said, that's $450 million plus, and we're not addressing that. We haven't really addressed consolidating some of the things that we can consolidate. We have 231 state agencies. It's just a ridiculous number. And we have an agricultural department, but we also have a peanut commission and a sorghum commission and a boll weevil eradication commission. I don't know why these things have to be separate state agencies instead of being rolled into the agricultural department. What they're doing may well be something that we want to keep, but we can keep it in the agricultural department instead of as its own separate agency. This is also, we've seen a little bit of headway with our law enforcement agencies. We have a half a dozen law enforcement agencies that could all be combined together. And we've finally seen a little bit of movement on that after years and years of nothing. So there's a lot of these things that, this prioritization of spending, like I said, we've had budget shortfalls for the past several years. And we get down to, we didn't get as much money as we expected in tax dollars, so every agency has to take an across-the-board cut. Well, you wouldn't do your family budget like that. If you had a loss of income, you wouldn't try to pay 90% of all your bills and expect that to work. You'd cut the Netflix or the Hulu. You'd sell the extra car. You'd do something like that. And they have not done any of that. So talking about prioritization of spending and really focusing on the core functions that the voters of this state want our government to do and let some of this other stuff that we don't need go is really important.
I mean, that's an easy one. They have all these departments because then they can give high salary jobs to all the people that helped them get into office in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, yeah, that's one of the things, when you get all these agencies, you're able to dole out a lot more jobs, pay out a lot more salaries, make it look like you're doing better than you actually are, when in fact you're just sapping the taxpayers to pay for all this.
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, combining a lot of agencies, getting rid of some of them, that's obviously a good plan. And I mean, governments across the board always have a problem with cutting spending once they actually, start a program. There's nothing unique to Oklahoma. Nebraska does it. DC does it. I'm sure most local city governments have the same problem. Can never seem to cut spending. People get used to the goodies and they don't want to let them go. It's the unfortunate thing about it. All right, so you're in a three-way primary right now. How is the race coming along? What have been kind of the dynamics of that race right now?
Well, we've done a lot of events we've done a couple of events that have just been the three of us, but we've done a lot of events with the several of the other establishment party candidates. And then we have done, we've all been working on our own campaigns and our own strategies. And we each have very distinct styles. And I think that's another part of the dynamic that's been able to get us the attention that we've received, is that we're different people. I mean, obviously, there's one that's really different, and then there's myself and Rex, who are both we're not we don't have a kind of weird lifestyle. We show up in a suit and a tie for things that where you would expect a suit and a tie, but we speak about things in different ways. We look different. We go about campaigning different in different manners. So I think that contrast, as far as just stylistic, which really doesn't, it's not really about policy a whole lot. It just makes it clear that we're different people. We're not cloned out of the Coke factory out there in Kansas or anything like that.
Much as we may want to. Okay. Make your final pitch to voters, to Libertarian voters in Oklahoma, as to why they should vote for you.
Well, I've been on the political scene in Oklahoma for a long time. I know a lot of the people that are involved in those two establishment parties, and I've known many of them for many years, and I've had the experience as a candidate, as a state party officer, and that's really the thing that I would put forward as what is really different about me compared to the other two candidates. I like to think that I communicate better to voters and all of that kind of thing, but that's for the voter to judge. So. And one of the, I would say I do have a real focus on trying to make the message palatable to the most voters. And I'm also the kind of guy who's, I like to under-promise and over-deliver. I've been in sales for a good portion of my life. So, that was always the approach that I took. I want the voters to, when they look at me, when they hear me say something, to know that I really believe what I'm saying, and that I'm really going to try to do exactly what I promised and try to get you some more if I'm able to do so. And I believe in, we shouldn't be trying to act like we can deliver libertarian utopia next week. We need to make small steps towards greater liberty. And if we continue to take enough small steps, we can have the freer world that we want a lot quicker than if we hold out for big, gigantic concessions from the two establishment parties that we're never going to get.
All right. Are there any other issues you'd like to touch on before we leave? I didn't talk about tax increment financing districts. I don't know if you have those up in Nebraska, but basically what happens is the local governments get together and create a district where tax dollars mostly from property taxes go to businesses within that district for economic development. And basically what happens is it winds up being a crony capitalist thing that robs our county governments of funding and robs our local schools of funding. And when our local schools are robbed of funding, it gets made up by the state through the state equalization fund and becomes a bigger drain on our state government, and leads to one of the things that it leads to is tens of thousands of teachers at the Capitol demanding more funding. So if we get rid of tax increment financing, which it's called economic development, but all it does is poach jobs from surrounding communities. It doesn't really create any growth.
If we can get rid of that, then we can have more healthy county government and especially more healthy local funding for our schools that is not in the hands of the state legislature. So, TIF districts are something that's got to go, and it's something that I had expected more people to be talking about, and they're just not. So I'm going to start talking about it.
I think you just triggered Ben, who's the host on the other podcast. This is his baby. Is this talking about this topic?
Well, good.
Awesome. All right. Hey, Zach, do you got any more questions you'd like to ask?
I can barely think right now. My head hurts so bad. I apologize for how out of this one I've been.
Well, I hope you get to feeling better, and I know you guys are about to pack up and go to Texas. I hope you have safe travels down there. If you see Tom Laurent, I believe he's currently the Walker County Libertarian Party chair, and he is a good friend of mine, one of my mentors. Say hello to Tom when you're down there.
Sweet, we'll look for him.
Awesome. All right. Well, that's all we got for tonight. I think we're just about out of time. Thank you for coming on the show. When we had Rex on, we didn't realize that this was actually a contested race. So we just thought, hey, there's the Libertarian running in Oklahoma. We'll just give him some air. And then come to find out, there's more Libertarians running for this race. We're like, you know what? Let's interview the other guy in here and have him on the show. So I'm glad we got to do that. This has been a great conversation. Thank you so much for coming on the program.
Well, thank you for having me on, and for everybody listening, it's powellforgovernor.com, and more importantly, powellforgovernor.com/donate. I'd sure appreciate it.
All right. Is there any other way for people to get in touch with you, make donations, volunteer, anything that you'd like to plug?
Well, there's the Facebook. I can talk about it. The Facebook page, Chris Powell for Governor, and then I'm also on Twitter, OKCS Powell. So you can certainly follow me there. And I believe that on the website somewhere we've got our mailing address if you want to mail a check. You can certainly do that.
Awesome. Good to know. All right, everyone. Thank you for listening to the program. Remember, if you want to see more of our podcast, if you want to watch us on YouTube or listen to our podcast, go to roads2liberty.com. That's roads2liberty.com, and you'll see all our episodes on that website. We also have a YouTube channel. We're on Twitter. We're on Facebook. We're on minds.com. We're also on DTube, which is a brand new video platform that we're hoping takes off pretty soon because YouTube is turning into hot garbage.
I've given up on DTube. Steemit is not working for us very well. We'll get back to it, but my time is spread too thin.
Has it got bugs that it's got to work out?
No. I'll explain it later.
Okay. Well, not DTube. Forget that one. We will get back on it because, we don't like YouTube because they're being dumb. So once again, thank you, Chris Powell, for coming on the program. Thank you, everybody, for listening. You all have a good night.